It's my pleasure to welcome our attendees and sponsors to this incredible program that's going to bring you all kinds of information on caregiving, care recipients, healthcare, and more. I'm Ron Aaron, delighted to be your MC for this event. We have an amazing turnout of people, over 700 attendees, literally from around the world. Now, November is National Family Caregiver Month, and the theme for this year is caregiving around the clock, which is interesting because if you're a caregiver, you already know that. We'd like to recognize and honor the work of the family caregivers who tirelessly give of themselves to make sure someone else has the support they need. Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. This year, as last year, the summit is a hybrid event. Speakers and participants are online, and we're also having watch parties in several locations: Corpus Christi, Brownsville, Harlingen, McAllen, Dallas, San Antonio, and Tampa. We have people from all over the country joining us today as well, and some international friends. Now, I'm not sure if you are in attendance, but we have people who registered from Canada, Ireland, England, Nairobi, and elsewhere. A couple of general housekeeping rules. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions of our speakers. The chat feature is used to share your thoughts and ideas. And if you have technical difficulties, which we hope you don't have, here's a phone number you can call: 866-390-6491. 866-390-6491. This session is being recorded, and we will be sending out an electronic survey after the summit for those online. And if you are at one of the watch parties, you'll get a paper survey before you leave today. If you're meeting in person, please, online and in person, fill out those surveys. Social work and nursing CEUs are being offered. Certificates of attendance will also be available. Make sure you fill out your survey to indicate which one you would like and what name you would like on the certificate. Now, if you are at one of the watch parties, I'm sure they can direct you to the restroom if you need one. And if you are watching online, my guess is you know where your restroom is. Let me take a moment to introduce a woman who has really put incredible time and hours into making today happen. Tina Smith is Senior Director of Caregiver Program Operations throughout the WellMed Charitable Foundation. Tina has a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in social gerontology, and she's been providing support to family caregivers for over 30 years. Tina started her career working in the long-term care industry, then moved on to serving at the Bear Area Agency on Aging. Tina also taught gerontology courses at Kaplan University through their online human services program for more than 7 years. Tina's been with the Caregiver SOS program since 2016. She oversees the Caregiver SOS program for the WellMed Charitable Foundation. Please welcome Tina Smith.
Hi, and good morning and welcome. I'm going to welcome everybody to the 2024 Caregiver Summit. We are so glad that you are able to join us today, whether you're in person in one of the 10 locations that Ron mentioned, or you're joining us online. As Ron mentioned, November is National Family Caregiver Month. We want to recognize the important work that so many family caregivers do every day. The support you provide, and the sacrifices you make do not go unnoticed. You play a critical role in the health and well-being of the person you're providing care for. While we can't take away the hard tasks and challenging moments, we do hope to provide you with some tools that you need to continue on in this journey. Today, you're going to hear from two wonderful speakers who have both been in your shoes as caregivers. I sincerely hope that you're able to walk away with a nugget or two or three of information that will help make your journey of caregiving in today's world a little bit easier. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Enjoy.
Thank you, Tina. Appreciate it. Let me take a moment to introduce Miguel Juarez with the Area Agency on Aging. He's the manager of the Alamo Area Council of Governments. Miguel was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, earned his Bachelor of Science in Military History from Tarleton State University in Stephenville, Texas. Also has an associate degree in Computer Science from Central Texas College. Miguel is the ACOG AAA manager for Alamo and Bear AAAs since October 2021. One of the programs he oversees is the Family Caregiver Support Program. Miguel is a 35-year Army veteran, armor and cavalry officer, and retired as a lieutenant colonel with 14 years as an enlisted man, 20 years as a commissioned officer. He's got hobbies, and they include underwater basket weaving, don't ask, long walks on the beach, and visiting historical sites throughout the areas where he's served, including but not limited to Germany, France, Spain, Guatemala, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Malawi, South Africa, and Afghanistan. Miguel is married, has 4 children, and 1 grandson. And Miguel, take it away.
Thank you very much for that awesome introduction, sir. I appreciate you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Caregiver Summit, Caregiving in Today's World, right? Today. We come together to focus on one of the most vital yet often unseen roles in our society, that of the caregiver. Whether you're caring for a parent, partner, child, or friend, we understand the challenges, sacrifices, and the profound love that guide you every day. This summit is about giving back to you, the informal caregiver, with resources, knowledge, and the chance to connect with experts who are here to help you prioritize your own well-being while continuing to care for those you love. A special thank you goes out to Annette Wick and Dave Iverson, who bring a wealth of knowledge and compassion to this event. Annette with her deep insights into family caregiving, and Dave with his experience in caregiving, and through storytelling and advocacy, both understand the unique emotional and practical aspects of caregiving, of the caregiving journey. Their expertise will illuminate ways to build resilience, navigate complex care challenges, and find moments of joy and self-compassion amid the demands of caregiving. As we move through the day, remember this is your time. Connect with others who understand, take advantage of the resources shared, and consider this summit a chance to reflect on how you can care for yourself as fully as you do for others. Thank you for being here, for your courage, and for the difference you make every day. Together, let's make this summit a place of support, renewal, and empowerment. Thanks again for having me, and let's get after it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you so much for your service. Annette Wick is our kickoff speaker today for this incredible program. She's been a writer and teacher for over 20 years. Her award-winning writings span food, memory, and loss, and have appeared in creative nonfiction, Belt Magazine, Cincinnati Magazine, Edible Ohio Valley, I need to ask her about that one, and Italian Americana from the University of Illinois Press, and anthologized in Grief Becomes You, Poetry for the Dementia Journey, and Before the Diagnosis. Her books include 2 memoirs on caregiving, I'll Have Some of Yours, and I'll Be in the Car, and Something Italian, Essays and Recipes from the Family Table, and that'll be coming out soon from the University of Akron Press. Visit AnnetteWick.com, AnnetteJWick.com, and you can get a sense of what she's involved in and be able to purchase some of her books as well. Her talk, I'll Have Some of Yours, What My Mother Taught Me About Dementia, Music, Cookies, the Outdoors, and her life inside a care home. Please welcome Annette Wick.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ron and Miguel and Tina and the WellMed Charitable Foundation for hosting me today and giving me the opportunity to not only tell my story, but engage with all of you in regards to your stories. And I always like to start off my talks with a little caveat that my mom died before COVID, and I know some of you out there have probably struggled through COVID times, as we call them. And that was not part of my journey, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot that we could share in terms of our caregiving and our lessons and our hopes for our loved ones. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about my mother. And I grew up in an Italian American family, and my mother's family was from the Abruzzo region. And there's a saying about the Abruzzese that they are strong and kind. And so I've used that as my mantra as I was caregiving for my mom, as I go out and speak to other groups now and talking about caregiving, like the importance of really being strong and kind because it requires both. And it just depends on the situation. And sometimes you need to be both at once, and sometimes just neither, I guess. So that's a little bit about my background as far as my mom goes. And as Ron and I were talking earlier, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, so we have that Ohio connection. And but I live in Cincinnati now. My home has been here for close to 20 years with a stopover in the Pacific Northwest as well too. But during the time that my parents were aging, they were living in Northern Ohio, and I was living in Cincinnati. When we age, when we move away from our parents, we don't always recognize maybe the signs of their aging, and sometimes we revert back to being the children that we were. And so I was living in Cincinnati at the time that we started witnessing my mom experiencing some difficulties when it comes to dementia. And she hadn't been diagnosed with anything, but we were just at that point of, I think we're going to start going down this different path. And so one day I happened to get a phone call from my baby sister who lives up north. And she said, Mom's not bathing and Mom's not cooking. And those were two key essential elements of my mother, that she would always take care of herself and that we're Italian American. She loved to cook. We loved to eat. And those were kind of a wake up call for me. But I was curious, like, well, what can I do from here in Cincinnati? I worked as a writer. I had children I was raising, and I had also been a caregiver before. My first husband had died of leukemia, which I'll get to a little bit in a little bit. So I knew something about what might be on the horizon, but when it comes to your parents, it's a completely different story. So living 4 hours away by car, I wasn't sure what the expectations were of me. I knew what the expectations I had, so I knew that I would expect my dad to outlive my mom. I might expect them to move to a smaller family home. I might expect him to be the one that would be her caregiver. With two other siblings living up in Northern Ohio, I thought they might be my parents' caregivers. So there were expectations of siblings and other family members. There were expectations that my mom was still mom, that we would have time to sort through all of her Italian recipes and cook together, and that we would have that time together as mother and daughter. Um, and and that kind of goes hand in hand of the expectation that she would still be a parent for me, as opposed to having to step up and be the adult in the room, as we say that. So I'm going to read a couple excerpts here as we're having this presentation. And this is about expectations. I grew up in a boisterous and moody Italian household where my mother executed banquets of rolled antipasti, fresh ravioli, wedding soup, and trays of Italian cookies with the precision of a five-star restaurant chef. Leftovers were prized possessions. If I crept into the kitchen late at night, made a sandwich with crusty Italian bread from a cousin's bakery, and layered it with capicola, prosciutto, and the hard kind of provolone, the rattling of silverware in the drawer beckoned my mother from her chair as she dozed in the nearby family room. She didn't plan to miss out on any of the remnants of her hard work. "Oh boy, that looks good," she said. Her brown eyes, as circular as her round face, grew into huge ovals as she surveyed my sandwich piled high. I asked if she wanted me to fix her something too, but smiley and smartly she said, "No thanks, I'll have some of yours." Back then, I thought "I'll have some of yours" was my mother's way of saying, "I'm tired. I did all the work and now I'll just borrow from you and have some of what's on your plate." But she wasn't just talking about the sandwich when she said that. As my mother fried Canadian bacon during the Sunday brunch feast she cooked for my visiting college roomies, listened to me gripe about why my high school English teacher didn't like my work, held my words and letters I wrote home when my 38-year-old husband was diagnosed with cancer, or baked and brought cookies to my young teething son, she meant, I'll take some of that burden off of you and put it on me. Then dementia took a seat beside me at my mother's cherished oval table. The mother who gave birth to me after my father drove to the hospital in a blinding January snowstorm was no longer the woman in front of me. As her caregiver, daily I swooped into her care home and we leisurely walked along the corridors or lingered outside in the courtyard. Yet there were also times I found myself rushing to the ER, my heart banging, determined to do anything to hold on to her physically. I was her bodyguard and her safety net. If I could protect her from a fall by making her walk more or keep her from contracting the flu, she wouldn't lose more of her memory, and I could keep alive the mother who had given me life and loved me as a daughter, and I could protect myself from feeling her loss, or so I hoped. So I want to take you back in time. I'm the middle daughter of 5 children, and in my late 20s, I moved to Oregon with my young husband, and I was pregnant at the time, and we wound up actually having a little boy. That's Davis off to the side that you can see him there. My first husband's name was Devin. And I loved Oregon. I'm an outdoorsy person. There's a lot of great seafood, wine. Um, and I was really just as being the middle child, ready to get out of Ohio and try something new for myself. But like they say in the Godfather films, like just when I thought I'd get out, they pull you back in. Well, it wasn't they being my family this time. In this particular instance, it happened to be um, my husband Devin's diagnosis of leukemia. And throughout the course of 3 years of his treatments, we decided to return back to Ohio. That's where his roots were. And Devin eventually passed away. I wanted to be back closer to family again, as hard as a decision as that was to make. But so this was my first experience as being a caregiver, and I'm 32 years old at this particular time. So throughout the course of 3 years, and he underwent a bone marrow transplant for anybody who's familiar with that, but it's a very intense process and it does require a lot of hands-on caregiving. But a lot of the lessons I carried forward all had to do with how to be the voice for someone else. Now, I remember from a family trip we had all taken to Italy that my mother had been experiencing some stress. And I'm sorry, I'm coming back into the present, somewhat present tense, and causing some of this forgetfulness. There was a sense that she was starting to let go. And now I'm back in Ohio and trying to figure out how to raise a young son as a single mom and grieving the loss of my husband and starting off on my writing career. And I began teaching writing classes at an Alzheimer's, it's called the Alois Alzheimer's Center. And it was for individuals that had mild to moderate cognitive decline. And, you know, there's a saying about write what you know. But I also believe that we should write what we need to find out. And in this particular case, some of my lessons from that time was all about giving thanks and for watching these participants kind of liberate themselves with whatever words they could get down on paper, whatever words they could share amongst our group. And we all knew that while the words didn't last very long in their minds, that in that present moment, they all got to experience a sense of freedom. So that was, again, a little bit of a lesson that I carried forward with me. Now, I eventually got remarried, and my second husband actually had lost his first spouse to cancer too. So we brought with us a combined number of 8 years of caregiving experience, and as well as he's a physician. And one day my parents come to visit. Now they're in their late 70s, early 80s at this point in time. And we're all sitting around the coffee table, drinking, chatting, probably eating some of my mom's cookies. And I noticed that my dad's hands are trembling. And we think it's just the caffeine. But the next day, his hands are still trembling. And we wind up having a conversation with my dad. And eventually he drives back to Cleveland or the Northeast Ohio area, and he gets his health checked out. And it turns out he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It was early and it was controllable. As we like to say in the writing world, now the stakes have just been up. So my mother is starting to experience moments of forgetfulness, and now my dad has dementia. And my siblings, as I mentioned, some of them being in Northeast Ohio, one being here in Cincinnati with me, the other one in Florida, one by one, they start to more or less disqualify themselves based on whatever they had going on in their lives. And they are stepping away from any sort of caregiving responsibilities. I had siblings that were frequently at odds with my parents. I had siblings that just, on occasion would just disappear from the family and then sort of reappear. Now, this is a conversation I want to read to you from the book again, just a conversation I was having with my dad, just to give you a sense of where he was in his mind. One day, my father phoned. His voice faltered as I picked up the call. I'm having a hard time, Net Marie. Leaving the house with your mother for groceries. She wanders in the store and asks a million questions and wants to leave before we pay. The predicaments continued. I left the house for my housing authority meeting and she didn't remember where I was. She called the cell phone 8 times. 8 times. He discovered napkins and dishcloths stashed in closets with sweaters and jackets. He couldn't locate the keys to the Chevy Blazer, but the missing keys were the least of the worries when it came to my mother's driving. Soon she did stop driving altogether. For a while, I kept my mouth shut. I'm not sure my father wanted to hear any of my tirade. Puzzled by my silence, his voice dropped in sorrow. Well, Net Marie, what am I going to do? Your mother is the only one I have left to talk to anymore. Like my mother, my father was also 82. Friends of his were dying at the same pace as the juniper bushes around their home. And she forgets everything I tell her, he told me. In that line, the avalanche of 50 years of marriage rumbled down the mountain and landed on my father's heart. I should have just listened, but I couldn't. I wanted to fix the things I couldn't see. Dad, what about a support group? Yeah, I've been thinking about one. I perked up. My father was now talking about talking, yet I didn't know what that actually meant. He was silent in a way where his actions showed his love. If he slipped me a $5 bill to stop at Wendy's on my commute back to Cincinnati, it meant, hey, take care of yourself. If he drove my car to fill my gas tank while I showered before a long road trip, it meant, I love you. He was an action person and not a feelings one. Me too, which is why I continued to push. Dad, I saw a therapist after Devin died. I never told you, but surely you knew. My father was raised by staunch Catholics, but now slept in the pews during long sermons. Why didn't you just go to church and confession? He asked. Confession wouldn't have been enough, I said. I was raised in that same religion, a religion that hadn't saved me from nights of sweat and fears. Confession would never have been enough for me, and it wouldn't be for him either. But my father was now talking about talking. Uh, let's see, I might want to go back. Sorry about that. So I did what I always do. I sprung into action and I tried to take over where my father left off. I started up in Cleveland and we started looking at senior care communities. We started looking at communities that had smaller homes because we were still living in the family home that they had been occupying for 36 years. We finally I eventually convinced them that let's try looking in Cincinnati. They had been visiting Cincinnati for a number of years. They knew that city almost as well as I did in some cases. And I made a suggestion that there were several located close to my home, and maybe we should go check those out. And eventually, over time, my dad kind of settled into that maybe that would be the best course of option, as opposed to a lot of us trying to cobble together a care plan with different people being available and that they could be close by to me. So we settle on this place that's nearby, and my kids drop by. I can walk there. But now my father ups the stakes again. And I'm sure you all remember those times being in the back seat of a car and kids are all fighting and your parents say something to the effect of, if you kids don't behave, I'm going to turn this car around and we're all going back home. Well, that was kind of the conversation I had to have with my dad because he was complaining to all my siblings about having made the move. And I couldn't ever get him to tell me this directly to my face. And I did tell him, I said, Dad, if you're not happy here, we will pack everything back up and we will find you a place back north. So, back 4 hours north, as we say from here. And I don't know, something about that conversation, as hard as it was maybe the point in which he became resigned. And he agreed that this would be the best for my mom as his Parkinson's continued to pose challenges for him. Now, they were still in independent living, able to live independently at the time, but they were in another one of those care communities that's the continuum, right? Where you can go through, various phases, and there would be a place for my mom there. Now, after, let's see, okay. So according to the AARP, there are over 48 million caregivers in the United States. 61% of those caregivers are also working, juggling caregiving responsibilities with their jobs. Most provide at least 20 hours of care each week, equal to an unpaid part-time job. And in 2021, the care provided by unpaid family caregivers was valued at $600 billion. And the AARP also projects that the caregiver ratio will shrink from 7 potential caregivers per frail older person today to 4 in 2030 and 2.9 by 2050. Well, I share these statistics because they are startling. And it is important to have these conversations with whoever the next person is going to be that's going to care for you, or the person that you are going to be caring for. I always call myself like the default daughter, the default caregiver, because my dad had never had that conversation with me. He always just presumed that it would be me. And that brought forth a lot of resentment, not really within myself, but amongst some of my siblings as well, too. Unfortunately, my father dies before my mother, and now I am the sole primary caregiver for my mother. And I've made a decision that she probably needs to move away from this first senior living community that we had selected for them. She needed a little bit more oversight, and I also wanted to have her to have a little bit more enrichment opportunities for whatever time that she was still left for us. The first place that I move her to, trouble starts brewing right away. And she winds up in some altercations with other residents there. And I don't know how it is where you live, but in our state, once those types of things happen, you have choices of medication or you have to move your loved one. I chose medication at first. That wasn't the answer. So I decided after that to move my mother, and hoping that this next move was somewhere where they would have a better understanding of her very particular individual circumstances, and be able to see her from that individual standpoint. So she winds up living there for 6 years. The time passes fast and the time passes slow. But what's most important is that being her caregiver, um, speeding through some of these other pictures, I'll go back so we can enjoy um, some of those too. But being her caregiver, I was her constant. And I found this quote that I love to read during my presentations because we all remember essential workers. And my husband, as a physician, was an essential worker, but we forgot that family caregivers were essential. With dementia, a caregiver is kind of the extension of the mind of the patient, said Dr. Jason Karlowish, a co-director of the Penn Memory Center and author of The Problem of Alzheimer's. They fill in where the person with dementia can no longer exercise their moral agency and moral experience. Often a caregiver is an aging spouse who before the pandemic visited her loved one's nursing home every day and maybe stayed for hours, helped with feeding, bathing while the nursing aides were busy, or just because she preferred it that way. Since the start of the pandemic, most family caregivers have been barred for care facilities and had visits severely restricted. All of a sudden, the people who would come there and help their minds function were taken away. Some geriatricians have now seen caregivers, these caregivers I'm speaking of, as essential parts of dementia healthcare. We are essential to our loved ones more so than anyone else. And I say that with an asterisk because the staff at my mother's care home was also essential. And they too became her family through a lot of the bonding that we did together. So back to this constancy. I'm the constant. Her staff is the constant, but my mother is rarely the constant. Um, I will try to get her outside. The word outside is in the title of my book because it was important to her. She loved sitting in the sun. So trying to get her outside because I know she likes it, but we wind up having this whole little altercation until she finally kind of nudges herself, or I nudge her a little bit outside, and the sun hits her face, and she sits there and says, "Oh, yes, this is what I've been looking for." And we do know our loved ones best, and we have to figure out like what's the balance of, is she going to turn around and slug me at any minute just because I wanted her to get outside? I mean, the possibility did exist, but I always had a sense of where and when, those lines based on time of day, based on my own personal mood as well too. Um, and like as I said, my mom was rarely the constant. She had so many mishaps that the doctor said, "I think she's got 9 lives." And I said, "I think you're wrong. I think she's got 13." Because not only did she have a lot of the UTIs and the mini strokes that go along with the UTIs, um, she had some falls. She even had a very serious soap swallowing incident, which for some reason, someone had brought their loved one a small bar of soap, and my mother happened to wander into their room. She got a hold of the soap, and it turns out she was allergic to whatever the fragrance or the dye was in the soap. And I had to nearly decide if she was going to have a tracheotomy at age, 86. Um, Eventually, I make peace with myself, with the staff, with where my mom is. And this takes time. We can't forget how much time it takes to make peace within ourselves. And again, to relate this back to writing, a lot of writers, including myself, we write from what I say are our wounds, our hurts, and our pains. And if we're not careful, we wind up caregiving from that same point too. And so I always had to take care to more or less check myself on my way in, on my way out when I went to visit her. If I was in a bad mood, that might be transmitted because she was very sensitive to whatever the moods of the people were around her, because her moods were very sensitive too. I'm going to skip ahead here and read something related to this. And let's see, page 149. Here we go. By the time I had turned 40 and remarried, my mother was beginning to show signs of dementia. She couldn't write a letter like she did to me in college to advise me to be careful, be studious, be good. For months after my father died, my attempts to care for her still centered on being good to achieve the desirable result. I was good if I made certain the nurses kept to my mother's bedtime rituals or her medications, or followed up with the podiatrist, or if I made sure her nails were painted, convinced her to attend watercolor painting, or coerced her into playing the game Finish the Phrase by whispering in her ear. If I did the right things, she would still see me as being good. I was also trying to make up for my father's death, for anyone who didn't visit because it was hard. It was hard. And it took an emotional toll on me and my reservoir of courage. It took setting aside other aspects of my life, and I did it anyhow because that's how I knew to be good. But it wasn't until I gave up on perfection, because there was none to be had in my mother's dementia, that I saw her love for me. And I didn't have to be good all those years to earn her love. I don't think my mother had ever wanted me to be perfect in my behavior. Good simply had become enough. Enough, my mother shouted in the middle of Mass when the chaplain bellowed forth the old rugged cross, or when a mumbling resident had gone on too long about the bird that had flitted away 20 minutes earlier. Enough, I said, walking out of her care home one day after she yelled at me for reading the newspaper to her. For 10 minutes, I sat and sobbed in my car. Later, I relayed the story to my husband and swore I wouldn't go back. Enough, I saw in my mother's eyes one day when I felt her touch was magic, as if she had waved a wand and filled me with all she had left. Enough, I felt, no longer needing to read her letters to understand what it meant to be good. Oh, there you go. So, like I said, if my mom could get outside, it was a good day for her and me. If we talked about something being something Italian, as the name of my forthcoming book implies, um, it was another good day. And so in my head, I started working with this phrase called story-centered care. And I knew that as long as I could continue telling the stories about my mom to her staff, to the people around her, to even some of my younger family members that didn't remember the mother that I knew, that there was a piece of my mother that we could all hold on to. And there was a piece of my mother that we could all understand, like what was part of her essential being, what was essential for all of us in terms of caring for her. And and I do believe that in this approach, that was my approach only, that this is how I created a family-like atmosphere for my mom to exist within this care home. These people that are with her 24 hours a day when I'm with her for maybe 3. And we were creating all these connections across our losses and with other family caregivers, with other, staff members, and trying to build up this community. And that's what was always important, for growing up in an Italian American family. Family is always talked about from an importance standpoint. And this is what we do to build community. We bring other people in. I would have preferred a different ending for my mom, but instead it was kind of the age old, she fell. She was outside though. She broke her hip. The pain of just a few days just aged her by so many years. And at this point, she's 91. and I had to decide what was next for her. Hours ago, the x-rays had been read. My mother had sustained a hip fracture, serious enough to consider surgery. If she were someone else, younger, more spry, I was vindicated in my earlier insistence that she should be released from the hospital. But in another sense, I was condemning her. I signed on for hospice care for her, for comfort, instead of surgery for the fractured hip. It's not end-of-life care, I repeated guiltily to siblings and friends. There was a difference. In all the decisions I had made, my mother's fall had made the decision, but not the follow-through, easy for me. Would her life be shortened now that she had fallen? Perhaps not any more than if she hadn't. Would she be comfortable in the Cadillac of wheelchairs and hospital beds? Probably so. She was already napping plenty. Her body was worn down from being worn down. Finally, it was time for me to say no, to no more surgery or medical intervention. It was what I was best at doing. My mother was snoring now, making sounds like the jackhammer that was used during construction near my house. I was glad I wasn't there to hear it. Her room was near the television, and Dorothy's voice in The Wizard of Oz streamed down the hallway. It was the scene where Dorothy first encountered the Wicked Witch of the West after Auntie M's home landed on the witch's sister. "Just try to stay out of my way," the witch said. I used to crouch behind the patchwork couch to watch the movie as a youngster and wrap my skinny arms around my mother's belly and shut my eyes. But I couldn't hide any longer. I had to face my mother and our future. She lay before me, sometimes gurgling with eyes closed, sometimes staring wide-eyed. She had not said much, but offered a few smiles and stroked my hair. "I'm here," I reminded her out loud and plastered my arms to her torso, unwilling to let go. "We'll get through this together." And so we did. And so we did. And while it wasn't the ending I could have hoped for, her death came in a very special moment that I am not going to share. A little teaser to buy the book and read the rest of the story, but it was important in terms of what I considered essential for my mom. I did come to see her as a person who was strong and kind, and I felt like I had become that person who was strong and kind. And this book is a testimony to our time of becoming that together, and my love for my mom, my love for the staff, and to everyone that we came in contact with, including, there's still snippets of us that get together today that have lunch, or some of the staff that I've worked with have gone on to work at other care homes, and they invite me in to have these conversations and to share what I sometimes call my how not tos in terms of caregiving. At the beginning, we talked about the title of my book. When it comes to dementia, take time to be with your loved ones now. Learn as much as you can about their life. Otherwise, you're left speculating in the future. When it comes to music and the outdoors, I always talk about what is the essential question in this person's life. And for my mom, those were the essential question, like what made her happy? Music and the outside. And if I could focus on those kinds of things, that would be a win for me. That would make this a successful caregiving venture. Regarding her life inside a care home, it's important to be observant, and not just of your surroundings and loved ones, but of everyone else. And we can learn a lot by just watching others and their approach to caregiving as well too. And we learn a lot about the fragility of life. And just the other day, I gave a a caregiver writing experience workshop. And I still write about my mother because I am still learning, but I'm also missing those days in which I felt so grounded in my life because I knew how close I was to kind of touching humanness in a way. And when all else fails for my mom, there were always cookies. And on the front cover of the book is our family cookie. We call them pizzeles, if anybody's familiar with those. So when all else fails, there's cookies. Um, my book, I'll have some of yours, is available in paperback, in audio, in e-back form. Um, it's available through plenty of online channels. You can visit my website, AnnetteJwick.com, for virtual caregiver writing workshops, books, writings, and other events. And before we move into any sort of question and answers, I just want to leave you with a few of my lasting lessons. And the first is to give more love than care. And this is so hard because we think taking them to the doctor's appointments all the time is, that's giving love, but sometimes love is just being present. And that's important. Um, I mentioned earlier about how writers write from their wombs, and we must be careful not to give care from those same wounds and have these expectations of our loved ones that go so far back. It always comes back to like staying in the present moment. And there's a writer, I love Anne Lamott, and she writes about aging so comically and beautifully, but it's almost everyone's secret. We look in the mirror saying, who's that old person? Well, inside there's pretty much the same person we always were. A lot of stuff falls off, your vision, your youth, your memory, but better stuff is left behind. And that too is important. What is the stuff that's been left behind? What are we left with? And what can we celebrate? And this is the last thing I always tell people, that in our time together, I watched as my mother became closer to being the perfect state of being. This humanness that I mentioned that we can all touch in our own way. And I hope that you can carry all those lessons forward. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Annette. That was beautiful. And since I can't see the audience, I suspect many like me had a few tears trickling down our faces. Beautiful sharing all of those stories. Now, if you want to ask a question, we make it simple. At the bottom of your screen or wherever you may be, type into the Q&A the question you may have, and Daryl or Emily will share those with us, and Annette will as well. And once again, thank you all for being with us for this presentation. We've got another great one coming up. And so, Daryl, are there questions for Annette?
Yes. Hi. There's a lot of the testimony that everything seemed to resonate amongst many of the listeners that we have. Very powerful, very heartwarming, but then also there's questions, actually, one of them regarding the frustration of being young and close to the retirement age, but being between Social Security, but not having financial resources to actually get the services that you need. I was curious to see, Annette, if there was anything that your thoughts on that.
I would say that I did not have that. And truly the only reason why I didn't experience that is because of the life insurance policy that my father left behind. Otherwise, we might have been in a little bit more of a bind. But there are resources. There's a lot of aging resources. I'm sure Miguel and some of you others could possibly weigh in on that too. Like locally, we have a foundation, and they are totally separate from, say, like an Alzheimer's Association Foundation, and they strictly focus on what they can do for the caregiver, whether it's like a respite hour or creating different community events and the caregiver writing workshops. But I wish I had a better answer for that, and I wish that a lot of like home health services, were possibly more inclusive in some of our healthcare opportunities. I hope that that's coming because as I mentioned, the numbers for the AARP slide, they're astounding and things are going to need to change.
Awesome. There was also some additional questions too regarding what advice would you give somebody who's starting off in their caregiving roles, and what writing workshops what do entail?
So I'll go to the writing workshops because that's the easy one. That's the slam dunk. But my writing workshops, we host them virtually and we host them in person as well too. And they're 2 hours. And what we do is we write about our caregiver writing workshops. They're a safe space. I have a partner whose mother has also walked the same sort of path that I've walked. And we've been offering these. We started off by offering them through the Alzheimer's Association a while ago. And now we have a different partner. But they are very popular. I think people walk away with a sense of here's something I can do on my own, because we think caregiving is all about our loved one, but caregiving really has to start with ourselves. And that's my advice for somebody who's just starting out, is to make sure that you are grounded in who you are, that you have some outlets for yourself, a healthy outlet for yourself. And even if it's just writing, which is inexpensive because we all have pen and paper, there's books. There's a group called alzauthors.com, ALZAUTHORS.com. So Alzheimer's, alzauthors.com. And they have a plethora of resources of people that have written books. Sometimes it might be too close to read somebody else's experiences. And that's why maybe just writing your experiences and journaling about them is really one of the best things I can say for you to do for yourself. So they kind of go hand in hand.
Awesome. And we have a few more if we have time. One question is essentially you're wondering about the connection between UTI and mini strokes. I was wondering if you can elaborate a little more, at least from your perspective.
Yes, and I'm not qualified to give any sort of medical diagnosis other than that when my mother, sometimes when she might fall and it might have the appearance of what might have been a mini stroke. And, um, you know, further down the line, the diagnosis is urinary tract infection. And those do lead to, um, symptoms where it appears that they've had some mini strokes. And she eventually would like come back from that, but we called them mini strokes, just as a generic term.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess one final question, which was just your advice regarding conflicts, not being on the same page.
Conflicts within, do you think that's within family members or within the I'll just answer within family members.
That's
I will
correct. Family
say
members.
that, again, going back to places like the Alzheimer's Association, or, looking for local caregiver nonprofits, that there's a lot of mediation that's available to family members, that is important. And I think that's important. Having those early conversations and making sure things are written down. And also the one thing that made for a lot of strife in our family is that, because my dad was speaking for my mom at a certain point in time, he did not communicate to all of us together as siblings what his wishes were. And that created a lot of conflict amongst the siblings. So regardless of what the decisions are, they are still important to be communicated clearly, at the onset, at the earliest possible, and they will always change too, right? So to always be, I always tell people, in terms of decisions that you're making, that it's the right decision for right now, and recognize that that's going to change.
Perfect. Thank you. And two more questions that just popped up. One of them was, do many people suffering from dementia also have delusions? And then one final question, which is, if you were to look back retrospectively, what would you do different?
Let's see. So the first question was about delusions and dementia, and the answer is yes, but I'll have to categorize that and say that they are there are 200 plus different types of dementias, and so each one is going to be very unique to if you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia. So everything is going to present itself in so many different ways, and that's nothing that you can even predict, but you can educate yourself on. And the second question was,
What would you do differently if you could go back and retrace your steps?
yeah, what I would do differently goes back to my advice about family conflicts, and that would be ensuring that my father had communicated effectively with all my siblings, with us all together in the same room as the family that we were all raised to be. Um, and I think that might have helped us all along in the end and made for a little bit more smoother sailing in the middle of our journey.
Well, that's great. Nice job. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ron and Tina and Miguel and WellMed. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Annette. And again, if people want to get a hold of your book, how do they do that?
They can visit AnnetteJWick.com. They can find me all over online. And if you have specific questions that you would like to have answered, you can always, I'm always open to emails, and you can email me at amjwick@gmail.com.
Annette, thank you. We really appreciate it. Now, I want to go back to where we began, and we've got a chance now to introduce our title sponsor, our friends from United Healthcare. Well, thank you. That's our title sponsor, our friends from United Healthcare. And I want to now introduce from Vitas Healthcare, a diamond sponsor, Teresa Migley, who's the Regional Director of Market Development. Teresa, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Really briefly, want to go through an article that is highlighted on our website about caregivers. So just starting off, it's been the benefits of caregiving, and wanted to talk about it's not unusual for the strain of caregiving to cause simultaneous positive and negative effects. And really want to highlight the positive effects today, just really briefly. There have been numerous studies that have been found, however, that caregivers who dwell on the positive aspects of caregiving show that they actually have lower levels of depression. So want to just focus on 3 brief areas real quick where it does show that it is beneficial. So emotional, right? So the National Opinion Researcher Centers did a survey that indicates 83% of caregivers found the experience to be rewarding. So emotionally, caregivers' responses from this study showed that the sense of giving back to someone who cared for them, they had a satisfaction of knowing their loved one is receiving excellent care, and they themselves, the caregiver, had an increased meaning and purpose in life. One of the next areas is physical. So unfortunately, caregivers are often on their feet. They're bending, they're lifting, they're walking, they're helping their loved one provide activities of daily living, and sometimes manipulating heavy medical equipment. So therefore, it's building strength and stamina. And the last area was cognitive. So these caregivers are so often juggling schedules, they're paying bills, they're managing medications, times, and doses, and then talking to insurance and healthcare professionals. So oftentimes, this is also sharpening the mind and improving memory. Those are just some brief areas that if we can focus on some of the positive aspects, we're hoping that it really does lower the depression level of the caregivers. And here at VTOTS, we appreciate our caregivers. We're here to support them in their time of need. And we thank you so much for allowing us to be here, WellMed.
Well, thank you so much, Teresa. We really appreciate it. I want to take a moment now to mention and thank our sponsors. We heard from United Healthcare. We just heard from Vitas Healthcare. Mobile X-Ray, a platinum sponsor. Veranda Rehab and Healthcare, a platinum sponsor. EVT Emergency Vehicle Technician, a gold sponsor. Legacy Home Health, gold. Bridges at Mission, silver. Caregiving, a company, silver. Cigna, silver. Funeraria del Ángel, silver. The law offices of our friend Carol Birch. Aetna, bronze. Amadeus, bronze. Amor Eterno Provider Services, bronze. Brookdale Trinity Towers, bronze. Brownsville Public Library, bronze. Cameron County Public Health, bronze. Care Plus Health Plans, Humana, bronze. Humana, bronze. Jack in the Box, bronze. Medicare Pro Insurance, bronze. Older Adults Technology, AARP Technology. Sage Care Management, who provided the CEUs for today's Caregiver Summit. Sapient Insurance Group, bronze. Star Insurance, bronze. The Brokerage Inc., bronze. Trinidad Primary Home Care, bronze. Uresti Senior Assistance, bronze. And let me take a moment now to introduce our platinum sponsor from our friends at Veranda Rehab and Healthcare.
Welcome to the Veranda Rehabilitation and Healthcare, a skilled nursing facility in Harlingen, Texas. We are recognized in our community for our outstanding, compassionate, and professional nursing care. At Veranda Rehabilitation and Healthcare, we'll work with you, your family, and your healthcare provider to create the most comprehensive and effective care and treatment plan possible, designed to improve and enhance your health and comfort from the beginning of your visit until it's time to return home. You'll find our rehab gym to be an active place with a talented and focused staff. Once our guests are on the road to recovery, our expert therapy team will customize and implement a program tailored to each guest's specific therapeutic needs. Trust your loved one's healthcare to Veranda Rehabilitation and Healthcare. Please feel free to call us at 956-423-4959 or stop by and experience a personalized tour.
I want to introduce our platinum sponsor, Mobile X-Ray.
Mobile X-rays on demand. This is Denise. How can I help you? Yes, we'll send someone right away.
In today's fast-paced world, healthcare needs to be efficient and accessible. With state-of-the-art technology and a commitment to excellence, Mobile X-rays on demand brings diagnostic imaging directly to your doorstep. Doctor's orders are needed. Their flexible scheduling ensures that patients receive timely care without delay.
Hello, I'm here for Mobile X-rays on demand.
Well, there you have it. Our platinum sponsor, Mobile X-Ray, and that's a great service. Our next speaker is Dave Iverson. Dave is an author, a documentary film producer, director, and retired broadcast journalist. During his broadcast journalism career, Dave produced and reported more than 20 nationally broadcast documentary specials for PBS and hosted local NPR programs in Wisconsin and San Francisco. When Dave was 59 years old, he moved back into his childhood home to care for his 95-year-old mom. His recent book about that 10-year caregiving odyssey is called Winter Stars, An Elderly Mother, an Aging Son, and Life's Final Journey. And remember, if you have questions, put them into the Q&A box, and we will deliver those and ask Dave those questions at the end of his presentation. So please welcome Dave Iverson.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for being part of today's gathering. It's lovely to be a part of this Caregiving Summit today. I was able to listen to Annette's presentation before mine, and it reminds me of how in her lovely and insightful presentation, how there's so many overlaps in our caregiving experiences. There's some similarities that you'll notice between Annette's experience and mine, including a connection to dementia and Parkinson's disease. But of course, there are differences too, as there are with all of our caregiving experiences. And it's my hope today that we can learn together about both those similarities and the differences, and that through that some new insights will occur that will help all of us as we go down this caregiving road together. So with that, let me begin my remarks. Early in the fall one morning in the fall of 2013, I found my 101-year-old mom, Adelaide Iverson, sitting alone in her Menlo Park, California kitchen. She was wearing her favorite deep maroon bathrobe, and her walker was perched right beside her, angling out into the room. I'd moved in with my mom about 6 years before that particular autumn morning. She was a mere 95 at that point, and I was a mere 59. My mom was still sharp when I moved in, still active and engaged, just no longer able to live alone. But 6 years later, her confusion and memory lapses had become more commonplace. I noticed that that was taking place. But what I hadn't realized until that particular morning was that my mom had noticed too. She turned toward me as I walked into the kitchen and without preamble said, "David, I think there are two Adelaides. There's the good Adelaide, the one who's pretty and smart and knows how to do things. And there's the bad Adelaide, the one who's ugly and stupid and can't do anything. I'm not sure which one is here right now," she said to me, "but I think it's the bad Adelaide." My mom had always been a force. She'd graduated from high school at age 16, from college at 20, and at the top of her class in both. She'd been a teacher, a devoted spouse, a mother of three, a passionate sports fan, a loyal friend, and a powerhouse volunteer. But now the long arc of her remarkable life was turning in a new direction. Yet she'd been able to describe what was happening to her with searing precision and without tears. She was like that. She didn't blink, confronting most challenges with a firm, no-nonsense demeanor. No one ever trifled with Adelaide Iverson, and that included me. When I decided to move in with my mom, I was a documentary filmmaker and local NPR journalist living and working in San Francisco. My life was full, but flexible. And my partner, Lynn, the woman who would later become my wife, was understanding of the choice I wanted to make. My mom and I had always been close. We'd shared a kind of easy bond. And when the time came that she needed help, I just figured that I was the guy who could provide it. And honestly, without a great deal more thought than that, I moved back into my childhood home. But of course, there was so much I did not know. I didn't know I'd get so exhausted. I didn't know I'd be capable of getting so frustrated or so angry. I didn't know I'd be joined by remarkable women caregivers who became my teachers, my comrades, and my kin. I didn't know that the Parkinson's disease that I had recently been diagnosed with would prove to be less challenging than being a caregiver. I was just noting that I hadn't realized that the Parkinson's disease that I had been diagnosed with a few years before I moved in with my mom would actually prove to be less of a challenge than being a caregiver. And I sure didn't know that after I moved in, my mom would live for another full decade before passing away at the age of 105. The caregiving challenge we face in this country will only increase, I think, as time goes on. Annette, in her presentation, mentioned a number of statistics about caregiving and aging, but here's one that I would like to add as well. Did you know that someone turns 65 in this country every 8 seconds? So think about that for a moment. It means that by this time tomorrow, there will be nearly 11,000 more 65-year-olds living in the United States than there are right now. And those numbers aren't just a demographic trajectory. They also describe our caregiving reality. In other words, those statistics are us. It's our reality as older Americans. It's our reality as spouses. It's our reality as adult children facing the prospect of caring for aging parents. As the late Rosalind Carter once observed, the day will come, if it hasn't already for many participating in this conference, when just about all of us will either receive care or provide care, and some of us will experience both. But here's the funny thing, I think. While it's clear that we face an elder care crisis in this country, it remains a surprisingly quiet crisis. Even when 200,000 people died in nursing homes and assisted living facilities in the early months of the pandemic, it was not enough to prompt Congress to support legislation that would have improved elder care, especially for lower income Americans. It's a quiet crisis, even though according to the AARP, there are around 50 million unpaid family caregivers in this country, mostly caring for someone old. Yet our coming elder care crisis does not yet prompt action. It mostly just prompts avoidance. There's a terrible irony, I think, to this, because caregiving is one of life's universal experience, and yet it goes largely undiscussed at the dinner table and in the halls of Congress. And I think there is an urgent need for us to make this quiet crisis the subject of a national conversation. I think we need to talk about the reality of care, the love it requires, and the loss that it can sometimes inflict. We have to be unafraid also, I think, to be personal. And in so doing, maybe we will be able to see that even in our very bitterly divided time, caregiving might also represent a kind of common bond. To reframe that famous phrase of Barack Obama's, when it comes to aging, there are no red states or blue states. There's only the United States. We're going to grow old together in this country, like it or not. And the truth is, not everyone who's a caregiver is as lucky as I was. In fact, I think I had it about as good as any family caregiver can have it. And the main reason why I was lucky is because of three little words. I had help. I had wonderful professional caregivers who came in during the day so that I could go to work. I could walk out the front door of my mom's house in the morning and not come back until nightfall, when it was my turn to take over caregiving duties through the night and on through the weekend. And as many of you already know, most family caregivers don't get to walk out the front door in the morning and not come back until evening. And the fact that I could had everything to do with another simple word, money, a topic I'll return to later. But for now, I just want to emphasize these two things. First, I was really lucky to have wonderful help. And second, do we really want to be a society where caregiving depends on good luck or good fortune? I was lucky in other ways too, including the fact that my mom and I actually got along, which, by the way, is not something you should assume in every caregiving situation. My mom and I shared many of the same interests. We shared the same politics, but perhaps most importantly, we shared the same team. We were both diehard, passionate Stanford University sports fans. My parents had started going to Stanford games in the early 1950s when my dad got a job on the Stanford faculty. And they never stopped going, even as my dad's own Parkinson's condition made attending games a challenge. And after my dad passed away in the early 1990s, my mom kept going to games, sometimes with me, sometimes with her old Stanford pals. She even threw out the first pitch at a Stanford baseball game at the age of 93. And after I moved back in, we continued going to games together until she was well past 100. I once figured out that she had attended at least 1,700 Stanford football, basketball, and baseball games. And I learned that there is nothing quite like going to a college football game with a centenarian who is capable of yelling, "Tackle him! Just get that guy! Get him!" And yet, despite all my advantages, I wasn't ready for what lay ahead. I didn't expect that caregiving would be so exasperating, so maddening, so completely relentless. But nor did I expect to learn that caregiving would offer moments when I felt like I understood life's purpose as I'd never understood it before. In other words, I wasn't ready for the entirety of what it really means to be a caregiver. And I think that's because caregiving, maybe more than any other life experience, places you right at the center of life's cross currents. You experience love and loss, anger and joy, usually when exhausted, and often on the same day. Caregiving is also intensely physical, which means that it's intimate. You learn how to transfer someone from bed to commode and back again, to cleanse someone else's skin, to brush someone else's hair, to spoon feed someone who can no longer feed themselves. And I think as adults, we are almost entirely unprepared for that reality. Sure, if you're a parent, as I was, you might have experienced something similar with a newborn. And yes, there can be striking similarities between what you do for a very young child and what you do when caring for someone who's very old. But those similarities also illustrate the profound differences. Changing your baby's diaper, no big deal. Changing your mom's diaper or your spouse's, not exactly the same experience. Before I moved in with my mom, what little I knew about caregiving was shaped by how my mom had responded to my dad's own long, difficult journey with Parkinson's. It wasn't so much how she cared for my dad, it was how she lived with my dad. Her approach to Parkinson's was emblematic of her approach to life. You get up in the morning, you do what needs to be done for the good of your family and for the good of your community. It's no nonsense, action-oriented life. And after my dad's diagnosis, there was still plenty of action to be had, plenty of things to do. There were all those friends to see, all those political campaigns to follow, all those movies to watch, all those Stanford games to attend. But of course, being action-oriented gets tougher over time. My dad's last few years were difficult, both physically and cognitively. And when my mom could no longer care for him at home, she had to move him to a skilled nursing facility. But she was there every day. She'd arrive at 9 o'clock in the morning, dressed to the nines, on her daily mission to make sure my dad got the best of care. "You do not comb his hair like that," she would command. "Comb it like this. You do not call him Bill or Sweetie. You call him Professor Iverson." I used to think that as soon as my mom was spotted driving into the nursing home parking lot, that someone probably got on the intercom to issue an all-staff alert that Adelaide Iverson had arrived. My mom may have been all business, but her business was us, her husband, her family, her community. My mom's fierce devotion to my dad never wavered, but I cannot say the same thing about my own steadfastness as a caregiver. I wavered plenty. And as my mom began to decline, both physically and cognitively, caregiving got tougher, as so many of you know. Nights in particular often seemed endless to me. It wasn't safe for my mom to go to the bathroom alone at night, so we installed a bell next to her bed that she could ring when she needed to get up. And when the bell rang, that meant that I needed to get up too. I'd stumble out of my bedroom about 10 feet down the hallway, the same bedroom that I'd slept in some 50 years earlier, the same single bed that I'd slept in some 50 years earlier. I'd help her into the bathroom and help with what needed to be done. Then I'd help her back to bed, stumble back into my own bedroom, and try to get to sleep, knowing that the bell would likely ring again. It's a bit like having an alarm clock that, instead of being set to go off at a particular time, just goes off randomly through the night. And 3 bell nights, as I came to call them, took their toll. And of course, when you're tired, your shortcomings become that much more exposed. And so I'd like to tell you a few of mine. For starters, I'm someone who likes to be in charge. And when you are a caregiver, you soon learn that you are not really in charge. I'm also someone who likes to be right. And not only that, I like explaining to you why I'm right. And of course, when you're caring for someone with progressive dementia, being right is almost an entirely useless attribute. I should have realized sooner than I did that the phrase, "Mom, don't you remember?" is one of the least useful phrases in the English language. Being a good caregiver, I would learn over time, for someone with dementia, is about comprehension, not correction. It's about trying to understand the truth behind someone's words, not correcting the words themselves. Here's an example. One day, when my mom was well past 100, I walked into her bedroom and was greeted with her intense glare. No one could really glare like my mom. So this wasn't a novel experience. But what she said next was something I never imagined I would hear. "David," she said, "I know that you were married to someone else before you were married to me." I've since learned that it's not uncommon for someone with advancing dementia to conflate family members. Sons become husbands, wives become daughters. But in that moment, all I could think to say was, "Mom, I am not your husband. I'm your son, David." It didn't register. One day, she even asked me if I'd like to crawl into bed beside her. But in time, I came to realize that in a certain way, those statements actually made complete sense. My mom had always loved the company of men, something I loved teasing her about. And that Adelaide had not gone away. She'd just become this starker, more concentrated version of herself. My dad, who she completely adored, had died some 20 years before. But she still wanted a man. She wanted a husband. And she'd take me. After all, in her view, I was available. Her body and mind may have begun to shrink, but her essential core was still there. But I was slow to appreciate the reality of her experience, slow to understand the truth beneath her words. More often than not, I just react out of confusion, irritation, exhaustion, or anger. So I'd like to tell you a story I recount in my book, Winter Stars. It's about one day when I took my mom to my Aunt Alice's house. Aunt Alice was hosting a family gathering. She was my late dad's much younger sister. And she'd sort of taken over the hosting role for family occasions that my mom had always played and always cherished, but could no longer perform. When we arrived at my aunt's house, my mom was crabby and snappish, and I wasn't exactly feeling charitable either. Finally, I walked over to her and said exactly as I would have to a 4-year-old, "If you can't act better, we're going home." A few minutes later, we headed for the dinner table. I didn't know that you could stalk across the floor while using a walker, but my mom did. My aunt asked her where she wanted to sit, and my mom snapped at her again. "That's it," I said, "we're going home." I steered her out of the room, out the door, into the driveway, into the car, and we drove home in complete and total silence. When we arrived back at the house, I ushered her into her bedroom. She stood next to her bed for a moment, I remember, just gripping her walker tightly. And then she collapsed onto the bed and wailed, "I hate myself." And here's the thing. I didn't say a word. I didn't feel really anything other than a cold sense of satisfaction. But as I look back, I don't think I really took in what my mom was saying. I hadn't taken in her truth. Because I think when she said she hated herself, she meant exactly that. She hated who she was becoming, hated the sense that she was increasingly trapped in a world where she could no longer be who she'd always been, including the person who'd always hosted family occasions. My mom's wail was from the heart, but sometimes I felt like my own was turning cold. I remember another time when I blew up at my mom for reasons I cannot even remember. And she started crying. And you know what I said? I said, "Go ahead and cry." And then I remember I just stalked out of the room, slammed the door behind me like a teenager, and went and stood alone in the garage. And I remember it was raining, and I could hear the sound of the rain falling on the roof above me. And I remember just standing there and feeling like, what's happening here? Who am I becoming? And then I remember taking a deep breath and walking back into the kitchen and sitting down next to my mom. And then I was the one who burst into tears. And you know what my mom said? She reached out her hand to me and said, "Don't cry, David. Don't cry." So this is caregiving, right? You get all of it. You get the Stanford games, but you also get the tears. Tears of anger, tears of loss, and if you're lucky, tears of forgiveness too. You get all of it. And sometimes you get all of it on the same day. I think caregiving begins to teach us that what matters most in our relationships with those we love is just to listen, to be there, to be present to what someone else is saying, to focus not so much on their words, but on that person's heart, to respond to their truth rather than trying to overwhelm them with the righteousness of your own. It's a lesson I'm still working on. The great English poet John Keats once wrote, "This is human life, the deeds, the disappointment, the anxiety, imagination struggles far and nigh, but all human, and bearing in themselves this good, that they are still the air, the subtle food to make us feel existence." I think caregiving is so often about struggle and disappointment, and imagination struggles far and nigh. But yet, as Keats writes, that's what it means to be human, which does bear in itself this good, that we truly feel our existence. And caregiving surely does that. It requires you to summon strength when you have nothing left to summon. It requires you to be loving. I mean, really loving, like 90% of the time. And that is a very tough standard to meet. So, how do we make it easier to be more loving? I know that might sound a little bit odd, but that's our challenge, isn't it? To be a more loving society. How do we do that? Well, for starters, I think it means that as a country, we need to pay more attention to those who need care and those who provide it. So if you know someone who's providing care, I have a simple suggestion, I think, to make. And that's, instead of calling that person up and saying, as we have all said hundreds of times, "Hey, let me know if there's anything I can do to help," try saying instead, "I'm going to the grocery store. Would you like 1 carton of milk or 2? Or, I'd like to come over and see John so that you can go for a long walk. Or, I'd like to come over and rake the leaves on your front lawn." When former Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg was grieving over the sudden death of her young husband, she said the best call she ever got was from a friend who said, "Sheryl, I'm bringing you a cheeseburger. All you've got to say is mayo or mustard." Sometimes we all just need a cheeseburger for a caregiver. I know that's a small thing, but this is something I really believe. Most family caregivers and most people receiving care need more help than they think they do. And most caregivers come to that realization later than they should. Here's something else we can do. We can honor professional caregivers and pay them what they deserve. I may have had plenty of struggles as a care provider, but I also was so deeply fortunate to have the extraordinary help I received from the women who assisted me. And so I'd like to tell you their names. Mele Toffa, Eileen Khan, Sanai Latu, Ronette Morales. Those were the 4 remarkable women who joined me for much of that decade. When I fell flat on my face, they lifted me up. When I stumbled, just admired that I was trying. They taught me that caregiving is at its essence a physical act of love that must be renewed each and every day. And those remarkable women, all immigrant Americans, all women of color, all women for whom English was a second or third language, gave me an extraordinary gift. They were there when I needed them most. But by and large, their work is not honored in this country the the way it deserves. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average wage for home healthcare workers in 2022 was $14 an hour. That's less than $30,000 a year. We have to do better than that. Now, I was able to pay my mom's caregivers better than that. But do you know why? It's because my parents were lucky enough to purchase a home in Menlo Park, California, in the heart of what would become Silicon Valley in 1950 for $15,000. And by the time I moved in 2007, it was worth just a little bit more than that. And that meant I could borrow against the house again and again and again to pay for my mom's care. I was lucky, but good care shouldn't depend on good luck. We have to have a national elder care plan that's more than just saying, well, make sure your parents bought a home in Menlo Park, California for $15,000 in 1950 and you'll do just fine. We have to do better than that. We need to make sure that all our citizens go through life's final journey accompanied by skilled and dedicated professional caregivers, family caregivers, and by a larger community of caring. A dear friend of mine who cared for his wife for 9 years before she passed away last year put it like this: we're all carried in life, he said. Sometimes we're carried by others. Sometimes we do the carrying. And I think it's when we carry each other that we become a true community. And I can't think of anything our country needs right now more than that, to become a true community, because that is central to what it takes to be a more loving society. I'm going to close now by just reading a short excerpt from my book. My book's titled Winter Stars: An Elderly Mother, an Aging Son, and Life's Final Journey. And it's really about this topic of carrying and being carried. The passage I'm going to read took place during the last Christmas that I spent with my mom. By this point, she was over 104 years old. She was often confused and agitated and restless. And I worried that she would never really be at peace. But on this particular night, something different happened. From Winter Stars. When I walked into my mom's bedroom, I knew right away that on this December night, she was in a different place. There wasn't any restlessness. She just seemed quiet and calm. She looked to be quite remarkably at peace. We just sat there for a long time, holding hands, and I felt a wave of tenderness come over me. After a while, my mom looked at me and said in a voice that was soft and only slightly slurred, "You look wonderful." And I told her that she did too. And I said, "We make a good pair." And she smiled and said, "What a pair." We sat for a while longer, my hand on top of hers, just sitting together, nothing more. And then she turned her head to me from her hospital bed and said, "I feel lucky." And she said it with more clarity than anything I'd heard her say in recent months. And I told her that I felt lucky too, lucky for all that she had added to my life and to the lives of those around her, and that I would try to remember always what she had given to me. And then she said it again. I feel lucky. And so I asked her if she could tell me why. And there was a long pause. And then she looked at me with eyes as bright as winter stars and said, because there's love all around. On that Christmas night, I felt something I hadn't experienced before. That while my time with my mom was still unfinished, our journey was now complete. We had endured our bursts of anger and frustration, but over time, our deep and abiding connection had always held. We had found a steadying, and while the currents of time and age had taken us into territory we'd never imagined, we'd kept traveling, and that journey had carried us to our truest destination as mother and son. It had brought me to the bedside of someone I loved so that I could hear the deepest of all truths, that love is all around. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to speak with everyone today, and I hope there are questions and time for us to continue this conversation.
Well, David, that was absolutely wonderful. You're an incredible writer, and I'm thrilled that this program is being recorded and it will be up on the caregiversos.org website sometime next week. I want to thank you for that. And yes, there's time for questions. If you haven't yet, put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and Daryl will throw those questions at you. Daryl?
Thanks, Ron. This is Emily. We have some questions that came into us. Dave, how old were you when you started your caregiving journey? And in a related vein, at what point did you realize you were a caregiver and self-identify as such?
Yeah, great question. I was 59 when I moved in with my mom. If you don't want to do the math, that means that I'm now 76. And as to when I identified as a caregiver, you know, early on, because my mom and I had a close relationship, and she was still spry and able when I moved in, though 95. You know, I thought, well, I'm just doing what a son would do. Just as if you'd asked my mom if she was ever my dad's caregiver, she would have said, absolutely not. You know, Bill's my husband. But I would say within 6 months, I realized that I was in far deeper than I ever expected. I kept a journal during the time I was a caregiver. I kept a journal most of my adult life. And I went back when I started to write this book. I went back and I discovered, sort of to my surprise, like within 6 months after moving in, I was writing things in my journal like, this can't go on. I don't think I can do this. Not knowing, of course, that I had 9.5 years ahead of me. So it was pretty early on that I knew that that's what it was. But I also learned, of course, that experience would continue to change. That those days when I felt early on that they were really hard, that the time would come in the not too distant future when I would look back at those days as the good old days, you know, when things were easy. Because the truth is, caregiving has a certain trajectory to it, and it doesn't often get better, right? It becomes more challenging, and that requires strength, good fortune, as I describe, and in time, you know, a little bit of wisdom about being humble about what you don't know, and about what you don't know will lie ahead.
Thank you. What would you say to family caregivers who are afraid to ask for help?
Yeah, I think we all suffer a bit from feeling like we're indispensable, that we're the only one who can do this. I certainly suffered from that to a degree. And again, it's a question of means. You know, I was lucky to have help. Not every family caregiver is in that circumstance. That's why I think it's so important that people do reach out and say, hey, would you just pick me up a carton of eggs at the grocery store? But to also realize that, in fact, you're not indispensable. The caregivers that I was fortunate enough to have with me taught me more than I ever, could have learned without them. And that there are people who are able and kind and can do this work. And if there's time and people are interested, we can talk some too about what I learned about how to hire people to help, because that's a really key thing too. But there's just, I just really would stress the fact that that get help when you can, and get it before you're completely exhausted. And the last thing I would say is that, which is a bit of a counterpoint, which is that I get really weary of, and I got weary as a caregiver of hearing people say, well, you can't really care for someone else unless you're caring for yourself. Well, that's just not true at all. As every caregiver knows, there are plenty of times when you have to care for the other person and not care for yourself. You can make a date to go out to lunch with someone, but if the person you're caring for is sick, what are you going to do? You're not going to go to lunch. That's what you're going to do. And so I think we also have to be aware of that, and that those little truisms, while they have some foundational truth to them, are much easier said than done.
Absolutely. Next question. You mentioned how fortunate you were to have financial resources to dedicate to your mother's care. But what community resources would you recommend to others who may not be in that situation?
Well, it's a huge problem in this country. I mean, a lot of people are under the illusion that Medicare will pay for home care. It does not. There've been proposals to do that and consider that. But that, again, will require, I think, our lawmakers and leaders coming to grips with the nature of this problem and the extraordinary cost of care. I think there are great organizations. There are groups like what you're doing in Texas. There are also national groups like the Family Caregiving Alliance that can provide advice. There are local groups in many communities, and where I happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a group called Avenidas that provides a lot of assistance for elder care. But you have to research those out. Otherwise, the choice, as many of you know, is to spend down your resources so that you qualify for Medicaid and get because Medicaid does pay for elder care, but primarily, at least historically, that elder care is in assisted living facilities, not within care at home, and that's the real work that we have to do. But that's nitty-gritty, roll up your sleeves political work, and it means supporting people who believe that that's an important societal need.
Our next attendee asks, how did your wife manage your decision to care for your mother? And did it cause conflict? How did you confront that?
Yeah, wonderful question. Two parts to that. First, Lynn and I were actually not married at the time I made that decision. We were a couple, but we weren't married. And we were actually still living in separate apartments. We weren't living together. And she was very, she was very supportive of that decision, which made a huge difference to me. She would come down on the weekend from her home, which was about 40 miles away, and be there for a chunk of the weekend. An action which, by the way, finally inspired me to get rid of my single bed. And so that was helpful. But in time, it was a challenge for us, and it spurred me to try to get more care so that I could then go to Lynn's sometimes for the weekend. And So it was a challenge. It's one we were able to get through. I think it helped that we both, children were her children and mine from a previous marriage. My daughter were grown, and so we weren't contending with that aspect of things. But it's definitely can be a challenge. And as Annette mentioned, I mean, in her presentation, dealing with that with siblings, there can be conflict as well. I wanted to make one note about that because I had two brothers. My older brother has since passed away, but both my brothers were very supportive of me. Neither were able to do any help a lot with care. One because he lived out of state and had real health issues, and the other because he had health issues, so lived nearby. But they were wonderfully supportive, and that means a lot. If you're a sibling in another place, to just let the person who's on the front lines of this know you care and know that what you're doing is appreciated. That's really, really helpful. In some ways, honestly, I felt like I had it easy because it was all on me. And people say, "Oh, Dave, it's too bad it's all on you." But in some ways, that's kind of easier, honestly. Maybe because I'm a guy who likes to be in charge, but I could do it, and I knew I had the support and love of my brothers. But I also knew in the end it was I could just do that without having to have everything be a question of back and forth and discussion and argument. And there's some real pluses, honestly, in that situation too.
Thank you so much. For our final question, did you develop your gratitude, or has it always been a part of your personality? If you had to develop it, how did you do so?
Wonderful question. I think I would say the gratitude and anger can exist side by side. I think that's one of the profound lessons of being a caregiver, is that you really do truly get all of it. And you learn to accept some things about yourself, your flaws and your weaknesses, to laugh at them, to know that they'll always be there. They won't ever fully go away. Am I still a guy who wants to be right and explain to you why I'm right? Yeah, the answer is yes. I laugh at it more. I'm more aware of it. And I am also more grateful. Grateful for all that I experienced during that time, all that it taught me. And I think during difficult times, it's a really, really important thing for us to hold on to, whether they're difficult times in the country or difficult times in our own lives. To find joy and gratitude where we can, because that sustains us for the struggle that life always offers.
Wow. So, David, I'll take mustard on my cheeseburger. Thank you very much. And if folks want to get a hold of Winter Stars, how do they do that?
Thank you for asking, Ron. Winter Stars you can get it. I always like people supporting their favorite local bookstore. So you can go to your favorite local bookstore. If it's not on the shelf, and frankly, it probably won't be, they'll order it for you. And of course, you can order it through our old friend Amazon as well. I would like to mention that all of the royalties from the book go to support 3 wonderful nonprofits. The Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, Dance for PD, which is a wonderful organization that grew out of the Mark Morris Dance Group in New York City, where they provide dance instruction for both people with Parkinson's and their partners. It exists now in over 300 cities all over the world. It's just a phenomenal program that I had the good fortune to make a film about called Capturing Grace a number of years ago. So the royalties go to those 2 organizations, plus Avenidas, which is an elder care support organization here in the Bay Area. So I'd, of course, love it if you buy the book. I hope that you would find it helpful, but it will also go to support some great organizations.
Well, thank you so much. It was absolutely a delight to hear you tell that story. And how are you doing with Parkinson's?
Thank you, Ron, for saying that, and thank you for asking that question. I'm one of the extraordinarily lucky ones. In the earlier presentation, she mentioned that, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. The same thing applies to Parkinson's. In fact, it's an old joke in the Parkinson's community. If you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, because it's such a varied condition. In my family, my father, my brother, and I all had very different Parkinson's experiences, and I was the lucky one once again, and continue to be.
Cool. Thank you, David. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron.
Now, for those of you who are with us and who want to share this, you want to listen again, you can do so. The summit is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to our website at caregiversos.org by early next week, and we hope you're able to access that. By the way, November 19th, the Spanish Summit will be offered from 10 to 12:30 Central Time. And if you want to register for the Spanish Summit, go to caregiversos.org. And remember, you don't have to go on your caregiving journey alone. There's help available. The AAA, Area Agencies on Aging, has information centers for community resources, and that's a good place to start. Give you available help in your community, provide free short-term services for people 60 or older, as well as for family or friends caring for someone who is 60 years of age or older. Easy to find your local area agency on aging. Just go to www.eldercare.gov or call toll-free 800-677-1116, 800-677-1116. Now, Caregiver SOS also provides information and support to family members and friends caring for older loved ones. There are 2 programs I want to share with you that are available virtually and at no cost. That means they're free. The Caregiver Teleconnection, that's an hour-long educational session with caregiving experts. You can participate live or listen to recordings anytime. You can log into the Zoom platform or just call in if that's your preference. And secondly, a wonderful program, Stress Busting. It's a 9-week evidence-based program proven to reduce stress, anger, and anxiety and improve the quality of life. And you show me a caregiver, I'll show you someone who could use that. You will learn stress management and coping skills. To find out more, go to www.caregiversos.org or call 866-390-6491, 866-390-6491. Once again, I want to run through our sponsors and thank them so very much. United Healthcare, Vitas Healthcare, Mobile X-Ray, Miranda Rehab and Healthcare, EVT Emergency Vehicle Technician, Legacy Home Health, Bridges Admission, Caregiven, Cigna, Funeraria del Angel, the law offices of our friend Carol Birch, Aetna, Amadeus, Amor et Turno Provider Services, Brookdale Trinity Towers, Brownsville Public Library, Cameron County Public Health, Care Plus Health Plans, Humana, Jack in the Box, and Medicare Pro Insurance, Older Adults Technology, AARP, Sage Care Management, Sapient Insurance Group, Star Insurance, The Brokerage Inc., Trinidad Primary Home Care, and Uresti Senior Assistance. And let me also thank and congratulate Tina Smith for organizing and shepherding this program. There are dozens of people behind the scenes who help make this happen. We thank you all so much for attending the 2024 Caregiver Summit. I'm Ron Aaron. We look forward to talking with you again soon at the next Caregiver Summit in 2025. Have a great day, everybody. And if you're listening at home, I don't have to say drive safe, but if you're at one of our listening watches, drive safe on your way home. Elvis has left the building.